But I guess that sort of raises questions around regulation. Now, you and I were on Ticker News or Ticker Crypto the other week. We're talking about regulation in this space. I get a sense you didn't fully get to flesh out what you want to say about it, as is the format. It's a 10, 15-minute chat. Where do you see the state of regulation? What would you want regulated and what would you not want regulated?
I think like a lot of places like Australia have good securities laws, or if something is a security, but the problem is we still don't really know if tokens are securities or not. A lot of lawyers still aren't even confident to sign off on that sort of stuff. Or there's not a utility token kind of classification. So if you're not a security, well, what are you? Are you property? Are you currency? That's still unclear in a lot of places. So I guess just clarification, and most countries are still trying to put a square peg through a round hole, and you do need new legislation written up, and they're still trying to, everything from tax things to regulate things this old way where it just doesn't make sense. And this is kind of what I was saying when I was in the room in these conversations, 2 or 3 years ago now, saying that when all this gets bigger and bigger, it's going to be so complex with microtransactions, interchangeability, loans, was that a sale? Is that lending against your asset? This interest is being streamed by the second. All this stuff that you just need to write new legislation for. It doesn't make sense to try and say, oh, well, that might fit into that. That's similar to that, because this space is going to continue to just throw things at regulators and governments that just don't exist before. So one step at a time.
For me, I don't want the transactions and the commerce regulated. What I would like regulated is the protection for individuals. I still think countries have a duty to their citizens, particularly my concern is around fraud and scams, because I remember getting into this space. I'll always remember this story, right? It was sort of 2017, 18. So 2018, I started with CoinJar, and I remember there's a big cohort, obviously, of Indian and Pakistani Uber drivers. And I was saying, I was just having a chat to my Uber driver. I'm like, oh yeah, I've sort of gotten into the crypto space. And there was a predominant group that had bought into OneCoin, which is a well-known scam, right?
Yeah.
And it was devastating because these guys would tell me, oh yeah, I know crypto. Which one do you have? I'm like, oh, Bitcoin, Ethereum. They're like, oh, I got into OneCoin. I'm like, oh, okay. How much money did you put into this thing? And some of them have put $10,000, $20,000, which is a lot. It's their life savings.
Yeah.
And I just had to tell them, I'm sorry, but that money's gone. I'm sorry to say. And that's what really gets me. I worry about people who lack education in the space, who get pulled into scams by an authority that they trust, whether it's a family member, someone in the media, whatever it may be. So that's where I look at it. I feel like there should still be those protections through things like FOSS and ASIC. And I think the entities that are here in jurisdictions like Australia should be regulated to show that they are protecting their customers in the best possible way. And they should get the right to license themselves based on that because of the amount of work that goes into it.
Yeah. It is hard because even regulators don't understand the technology intimately, and sometimes you do really have to understand it to explain why it's a scam, because there's such a fine line between DeFi and what is it a scam. So that does make it hard, and I feel for them. And I do reach out and let them know when there are scams that are getting bigger that need to get shut down and whatnot. I've made videos on how people can spot scams, but at the end of the day, it is so, you've would have come across this. It is hardwired into people to get defensive when they've put their money into something, and people will defend, scammers that are sitting in a basement on the other side of the world who they've never met. They'll defend it to the death about why you're wrong and why it's not a scam, this, that, and the other. But, it's always a scam. It always blows up. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of even stopped warning people maybe one-on-one or putting in effort and engaging in these conversations online, because you never get through to these people and you can't save everyone. And if you do get burnt once, hopefully you learn from that. Like anything, as a kid, you've got to make a mistake or get hurt and you learn not to do it again. And I think that's where the space was probably already self-regulating and maturing a little bit. So that's what I don't want to see, is that they do these overarching regulations and use these excuses like we're seeing at the moment. It's really, really, sad and pathetic, some of the stuff the US is throwing up about Bitcoin wastes energy, Bitcoin does this, that, or the other. Things that are just categorically untrue, to try and regulate it more. So that's the stuff that I don't want to see.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But yeah, I'd like to see more protection for consumers, where you see like obligations on, if you go to Coles and you have to buy those vouchers, right? And they have the big signs that say the ATO will never ask you for payments in iTunes vouchers and stuff like that. So they're trying to disrupt the process for these scammers at every stage that impacts the consumer, and sort of shock at least a small percentage of them into the idea that actually there's something wrong here. That's the big thing for me. If there can be something around that, I think that's what I'd like to see.